Do you think you have mice in your home? Well, I'm going to show you where to look around your home to find out if that's the case. I'll also discuss some things like how mice travel around your home and some of the things that can be problems with having mice in the home. So I know when I talk to most of my customers, when they're trying to figure out if they have mice, I often say there's three really big indicators right off the rip that if you have one of these three, there's a good chance you're dealing with mice. So the first one is when I'm hearing that scratching noise in the wall. That's something that usually customers will hear in the attic spaces above their bedroom. So I will take you upstairs. We're in my own home, so we're going to use this as kind of a test sample to show you around the house where you might see some mouse activity or see signs of mice to find out if that's what's going on. So the first one is going to be that noise. If you're hearing that scratching in the walls or you're hearing the scratching above your head at night when you're trying to go to sleep, could very well be mice. The other thing that customers will find in their home is droppings. So they can find droppings in their home, and that right away will indicate to you that you have a rodent problem, you have mice in the home. So I'm going to show you some places around the home where you can look to see where droppings are common places for them to occur if rodents are present. So we'll go through that in this house as well. And the last thing would be your food storage. So are you finding that your food's getting ripped into, something's feeding on it, something's going into it? So we'll talk about the proper way to store some of your dried goods in your home to reduce the chances of having a rodent problem or having mice in the home. So right now we're in my kitchen because this is going to be our first test site. This is where, typically when you're finding mice in your home, you're most often going to find them around the food. When mice come in, they're trying to get away from the cold, often in the winter, although they can come in the summer, spring, and fall as well. So it's not like it's exclusive to the colder months. Mice will come in all year round. Once they get in and they get away from that cold or they've established an area where they're going to live, the first priority for mice is finding food. So the first place we're going to start our kind of search, or where we're going to look, where we find evidence of mice, here is the kitchen, as it's where all the food is stored. So first I want to talk about some common areas where you're going to find evidence of mice. This could be areas where you're going to find their droppings, or areas where you can find that they've gone and they've chewed on some food. So some of the things that I suggest to my customers, the first place I always suggest looking is going to actually be under the kitchen sink. So you can see I get all my cleaning supplies down here. So you may not see it. And a lot of my customers' pantries are under the kitchen sink. A lot of people I know, it looks just like this. It's filled with cleaning supplies. So it's going to be really hard to tell if you just take a quick glance. But what I always tell people to do is pull everything out and look for evidence of mice. You'd be looking for their droppings. Okay? And people say, well, Tim, why are they under the kitchen sink? That doesn't make sense. There's no food there. There isn't food there. But how do mice travel through our home? Okay, so the most common way that mice are going to travel through our home is they're going to follow those plumbing lines. Because depending on what you have in the house, there's plumbing that leads almost everywhere, especially if you have forced hot water. If you have forced hot water, that's baseboard heat. What happens with forced hot water is there are pipes that run through your entire house, because when the heat kicks on, it heats up the water in the pipes. The pipes heat up the fins on the heat system, which heats your home. But in order to do that, they have to run that piping through the whole house, because they have to run that baseboard heat in every room. So now what you have is you have a superhighway for rodents to travel from room to room to room by simply following those pipes. All right. So my home, I don't have forced hot water. I have forced hot air. So I don't have an example to show you of a baseboard heat system right now. But I do have other areas of plumbing that are super common for mice to travel. And one would be underneath your sink. You're going to have a waste line for your water. You're going to have a hot and cold line coming up. So where those holes come up, they're coming straight up from the basement. And often, which we'll go look down there in a little bit, mice start in the basement and they work their way up. So again, they're trying to get into the kitchen because there's food there, and there's plumbing that runs directly into the kitchen. So it's very easy for them to follow up. So one of the first areas where mice start to show up is right underneath the kitchen sink. You can pull things out, look for droppings. If you see droppings, that means there's probably a mouse problem going on, or you have old evidence of a mouse problem going on. What I always advise my customers to do at that point is clean up the droppings in a safe manner. So don't just vacuum them up unless you're using a vacuum with a HEPA filter. And I often suggest wetting them down first so that nothing goes airborne. And then monitor the area. Do new droppings show up? If new droppings show up, then we know we have an active mouse issue going on, and we have to address that. All right, so that's under the kitchen sink. Another common area where we're going to find evidence of mouse droppings, and again, it all stems back to how do mice move around my home. So another common area is actually if you were to slide out your stove. All right, I'm not going to slide this out right now because I've already looked right in there and I don't currently have a mouse problem. But when you pull out your stove, regardless if it is gas or electric, does not matter. Okay, there's going to either be gas gas piping coming up, which again, there's a pipe chase where that gas piping's coming up, so the mice can follow that right up, get into your kitchen. Or even if there's electrical, there's often an oversized outlet for one of those bigger plugs. And a lot of times there can be spacing around that allows the mouse to come up. So it's super important when I'm doing my spring cleaning, which we're not there yet, can't wait for it to come. We'll pull this stove out, all right, every year for our spring cleaning, and we do one in the fall as well. And we'll just look behind the stove. We'll clean any food that might be behind there, but we're going to look for any droppings that are there. Because again, there's an access point where mice can come up and they can get into your kitchen. So you could find droppings in that area. All right, so those are going to be, outside of just finding droppings on your countertop, which if you do have an active mouse problem could certainly happen. If the mice get courageous enough, they can come up and they can forage on your counters at night and you can find droppings. This is a huge concern because if you're finding those droppings, what you're not finding or what you're not seeing is realizing is everywhere you're finding droplets, there's micro droplets of the rodent urine as well. So you always want to make sure if you do find any of that, you're cleaning the whole area very well to make sure that you're not leaving any type of bacteria or anything that could get you sick. The two areas that I focus on when I'm in the kitchen and I'm looking for mice is I'm going to pull out that stove, I'm going to look underneath that sink, and then a lot of times what I do is I'm going to bring you over here. Again, we're not going to do it today, but something I do in the spring is I'm always going to pull that fridge out. Because a lot of times when mice are trying to avoid being seen, they'll duck under things or duck behind things. So it's super common for a mouse that might be foraging in the kitchen. He hears your dog, your cat, your kids, or even yourself coming into that kitchen and just ducks behind the fridge. Also, another thing that's behind the fridge, particularly with this type of fridge and most fridges nowadays, is a water line. So you'll see a common theme here. Anytime I go to an appliance or an area, you're going to find that there's some sort of line, whether it be a plumbing chase, a gas line, or a water line for a fridge, coming from the basement up to the first floor level. So when they do that, they're cutting a hole for the pipe, okay? But they have to leave a little bit of room so that the pipe can breathe and then it can fit in there. And the mice take advantage of that small gap and they pop up and they come up from the basement. Because again, mice will typically start at the basement level. It is possible for them to start from above in the attic level, and we'll talk about that. But for the most part, in the homes in New England, the mice are going to start in the basement level and work their way up. So we're looking for these areas. There are not a lot of areas like this in most houses unless they have forced hot water. Everywhere where you have those baseboards, again, there's going to be more pipes going into the wall, and they're going to go back down into the basement to your furnace or your heating system to generate the heat in those pipes. So again, that makes it a little bit more tricky with a house that has forced hot water because those mice can pop up almost in any room, anywhere. So, a lot of things that I tell customers that they can do really quick with all these little gaps is go around the gaps where the pipe is and just make sure to seal it. Usually I use a little bit of steel wool just around the pipe to make it nice and tight so that there's no gaps around that pipe and nothing can come through. That can have a drastic effect on how mice move around your home, as it could stop them from coming up. If I pull out the stove and I see the gas line and I pack around that, so suddenly they can't come up under the gas line. If I go underneath the sink and I pack around those, suddenly they can't come in underneath the sink. And anytime you alter rodents' behaviors, you make things more challenging for them, you stress them out more, and it's going to help you reduce that problem. That's something that any homeowner could do to help themselves with an issue. So on the first floor here, we're all set because I don't have anywhere else on the first floor outside of my bathroom, which generally I'm not going to see mice going into that area unless I have a really high level infestation because, again, there's no food source in there. So they're going to be in the kitchen. But there's nowhere where I have plumbing coming up or no access from my basement. So next up, we're going to go down in my basement, and I'm going to show you where you would look in the basement. And this is the most important spot to start because this, like I said, is where most of the time mice are going to get into your home. All right, so now we're down in the basement. So in the basement, this is where generally most mouse problems start. So where do I look in my basement, or how do I know I have mice in my basement? Now, something to keep in mind when we're making this video is every house is structurally different and designed differently. So if you have a house, for example, with an old fieldstone foundation, some of the things today I'm going to say are not going to apply. This is going to be more towards this is a cape, for example. So I have a standard cement foundation. So everything's very easy to work with. If you have either a fieldstone foundation or even those old masonry brick buildings, a lot of times things can be a little trickier, but we'll discuss that briefly. So let's focus on where we're going to look in most of the houses nowadays, especially new constructions, or if you have a house that was built, more recently. What you're going to find is that you come downstairs, you got your foundation, okay, and then above your foundation, right here, this is called the sill plate. So the sill plate is right where you can see the wood of the structure meets with the actual foundation of the home. All right, so if I were standing outside right now, you can't really see it because the siding comes down a little bit over it and overhangs it, so you can't see it, but it's basically right where the wood and the cement meet. This is going to be the most common area on the outside, which you'll see in many of our videos we've done. Mice penetrate your home and get inside. All right, somewhere along this foundation level is going to be the most common area. So once they get inside, well, what do? They come out along the sill, and then they're going to run along the sill, and they're going to look for those pipe chases I was talking about. All right, so they're going to find where the plumbing is going up into the home, and let's see if we can find one. All right, let's go take a look. Not the best lighting, but if we go up here, we see this is where all the plumbing's going up for my bathtub. So this plumbing's all going to run straight up into the house. A little concerned about that pipe. It's awfully green. Gonna have to look into that. But that's where this plumbing's running up into the house. All right, and then that's where the rodents might come up and access the home. You can see there's a large space cut out for the plumbing, bigger than most spaces. Usually plumbing spaces won't be that big. This is just fit for a tub, so there's a lot more plumbing going up. Usually there's only access for the one pipe, but something similar is under your kitchen sink. And then if you have a gas line running up to your stove, it's going to be the black pipe in your house. Black pipe is for gas. So where the black pipe is going to be going up, they're going to have something similar where it's going through a penetration in the subfloor up onto that main level, and the mice are going to follow along these lines. And see, these lines are insulated, so that means that they're covered in this nice foam, which is good for your pipes, but also makes it very convenient for mice to grip and run across. And then they climb up, and now they're up on the main level. All right, so if possible, when you come down into your basement, now this would be a bigger spot, but if you had just individual pipes, you would like to try and seal those up so that mice can't get up into that upper level. So this is the common area where it starts. So why do I tell you all this? So where do you look? So what you do is you get a small ladder and you get a flashlight and go along your basement sill and check to see if you're finding droppings. If you're going to find mice activity in your home, that's the first place I'm going to look, because often the mice are just going to be running along that sill where they've gained access into the home, and now we're finding droppings on the sill. So if we're seeing that, it's definitely an indication we have mice, and we need to either address it ourselves, whether it be trapping, or call a professional like Debug Pest Control to come out and take care of the issue. All right, so that's the main area in the basement where we're focused on, is we're going around looking at that sill, and we're looking where those plumbing chases are. So I did mention a couple of other foundations that are going to be a little different. So like if you have a fieldstone foundation or if you have masonry brick, often you don't actually even have a sill plate on the home. It's just on the brick, will be just on the brick. So you got to be a little bit more creative, and you're going to be looking more on the floor to see evidence of droppings. And in some cases, if you have a fieldstone foundation, it can be even more challenging because there could be multiple penetrations throughout the foundation itself where mice can get in, because fieldstone is just really rocks stacked on top of each other. So unless those have been mortared shut, there can be little gaps where mice are getting in. And in some cases, you even have a dirt floor. So if you have a dirt floor, it's going to be even more challenging to tell. So what I advise my customer to do in those situations is to set up monitoring devices. So what is a monitoring device? You get a rodent bait station, you put a non-toxic rodenticide bait inside of it. Okay, so this means something that's not actually going to kill a mouse or hurt wildlife or anything like that. You're going to use a non-toxic bait block, put it in that bait station, and put that in an area that's inaccessible to both children and pets in your basement. So in most homes, we do this on the basement sill. You have to be a little bit more creative when you have a fieldstone foundation or you have a masonry brick foundation, all right? And you put those out, and then what happens is you're just monitoring that block. So if that block suddenly starts getting chewed, right off the rip, we know, okay, we got something going on. We need to have somebody come out to take a look at this mouse problem. So that's something if you can't see the basement sill, you could try doing something like that, especially like I said, if you have a masonry brick or if you have a fieldstone foundation. The other situation where you might not be able to see the basement sill is if with the design of the house. So one that comes to mind that's super common in this area is a raised ranch. Well, if I have a raised ranch, I don't really have a basement. Although there are some exceptions where there are some raised ranches that do have like 3 levels and there is a basement. But for the most part, raised ranches don't have basements. I grew up in one. And when you go down into the lower level, it's usually a finished area. And the basement sill is actually all covered up with drywall. And it looks like a shelf that runs along. So in those homes, you're not necessarily going to be able to see as much, but there's always usually a mechanical room. This is the room where your furnace is located. Your hot water tank might be located. That's usually still going to be in the lower level of the house. And you can monitor in those rooms by either setting up non-toxic bait stations or just going out and doing visual inspections to see if you're seeing any evidence of droppings. So those are all areas in the basement area of a home that you could look to help identify, do I have mice? Next up, we're going to go upstairs, take a look in my, what is the equivalent of my attic space. I do have a cape, so I don't really have a full-blown attic, but I'll talk about that when we get up there about some of the things you can do there. All right, so now we're up in what would be the equivalent of my attic space. So I do have a cape, so there's really it's not like your typical attic. So usually in homes, you're going to have 2 attics that are the most common. Is you have a pull-down ladder. That would be your best bet, as that gives you easy access into your attic space. It's very easy for you to poke your head up there and just see if you see droppings. Again, with rodents in the attic, you're probably not going to see the mice. and you're not going to see evidence of damaged goods or anything like that. But what you are going to see is you're going to see their droppings, and then it will look like small burrows, especially if you have fiberglass insulation. If you have blown in insulation, it's going to be a little harder to tell. It's much more chaotic because it's just blown in everywhere, and everything just sinks into it. So it will be harder to tell there. But if you have some areas that sometimes in attics you'll have like plywood boards, so you can store things up there, you might find some droppings on there. So if you have step ladders where you can go up, that's the best case scenario. It's the easiest for the customer. It's the easiest for the private homeowner. Hey, I just want to go check my attic. I pull down my ladder, I stick my head up there, I'm good to go. Another type of attic space that you run into is, we call it, I call it a crawl space attic. That's when in your closet, for example, there is a small access where you have to lift the board, and then you have to set up a ladder, and then you climb up through a little hole, and that's how you get up into the attic spaces. These are usually tighter attics to fit into. They're usually smaller attics, not designed as much for storage space, more just so that if you need to get into the attic for something, it's accessible. You could do something very similar to what I mentioned down in the basement, is you could set up monitoring devices along that entry point so that you don't necessarily have to go all the way in, but you could put the ladder up. You could go up to the door, lift it, and then put some non-toxic bait up there in a tamper-resistant bait container and see if you're getting any activity from anything chewing on it. If you are, that's an indication that you're definitely dealing with rodents. Most of the time when you're dealing with attics, I find that private homeowners probably not going to want to go into the attic, and that's where you're going to want to bring a professional out, as we can get up into an attic anytime and go take a look. Now, in this house, another common thing is we have what's called dormers. So dormers are when your attic space is kind of a finished space. So you'll notice like these slanted ceilings. So this is because this is what would be the equivalent of the attic, but instead it's been built into 2 bedrooms up here. So what we have is off to the side is this attic space here, which would normally be there. There's a wall in front of it. The only reason I'm not opening mine and showing you is because these have actually been converted into little closets, and you can't really see inside anything there. But often when you have a dormer and you have a design like this, you can open up the doors to this and actually see into like the unfinished areas of the attic, where you'll see like the plywood subfloor of the attic, you'll see the fiberglass insulation. And again, you can look for evidence of rodents in those areas, droppings. A lot of times people will store things in these areas. Sometimes it's Christmas decorations, which are very, very commonly causing rodent issues, as they'll go into it for various nesting materials. So it's always wise, if you're going to have an attic space like this, to be checking these areas, as you might have mice coming up in these areas. Also keep in mind, as I go through all this, if you have forced hot water again and you have baseboard heat up here, which I don't, but if you do, you have plumbing chases that come up here to force that water up here, and you could have rodents getting in those areas. So again, we're looking for droppings, we're looking for stored surpluses of food, and we're looking for like holes in the fiberglass insulation. So that's going to be some of the common areas where you see mice in the attic. All right, so now we're back in the kitchen. I've kind of showed you around the house areas where you want to look for mice. I've talked about some of the things that they do and how they travel around the house. But I had mentioned earlier in the video that it can be also common to find them in the kitchen, and you can find that they've gotten into your dried goods. It's super common where I have customers call up and hey, they're chewing into my cereal, my pasta, my rice. It's usually dried goods. Canned goods they're not going to get into. However, if you do have canned goods stored and mice get in there and you're finding droppings on those cans, I still advise wiping everything down, because always remember, anywhere you find droppings, there's also micro droplets of urine as well. You just can't see it. All right. Another reason why we can't have mice in the home is because they are leaving their droppings and their urine everywhere they go, and that can cause sickness and disease. So that's why it's important to make sure we're addressing these issues as soon as we can and identify if they're here. So one thing I just wanted to mention shortly before we wrap up the video is storing your dried storage. So I, obviously being in the industry, am a guy who's a little nutty about it, and not enough. I need to buy more of these. They're expensive. But we keep our cereal in these dried storage containers. The idea being that we were not going to deal with any issues of mice getting into our food, which will make the house less appealing. Another common area, I did it with cereal, but I see customers with all different things. Another big one that I get a lot is bird feed. I know customers love to feed the birds. I always advise keeping the bird feeder at least 10 feet away from your house, if not more. But where they store the bird feed, a lot of times you'll see it in the garage, and you'll see it in containers like that. I always, not in containers, I'm sorry, just in a bag. And I always advise they put that bird feed in a container, as that is a common place that will draw mice. So I do advise that if you have dried goods, a lot of dried goods, that you store them in some type of hard plastic container, as this will make it less likely for you to have pest issues, and it will also make it less appealing to any type of rodents. But speaking of this, has reminded me of a garage. Is another super common entry point for rodents. Now, unfortunately, I don't have a garage. I've always dreamed of one, but I don't have one. So let's talk about real quickly, how do I tell if I have mice in my garage? Well, the easiest way is generally those droppings are going to be visible. They'll be right along the floor of the garage. But I do know that most people keep a lot of stuff in their garage. It's a good storage area, so it may not be easy to see. So what I always advise customers to do is go up to your garage door sweep itself, take a look at the sweep. Is there any gaps in the sweep that look like they've been chewed through? And at the ends of the doors, on each side, when you shut that door, is there light coming into your garage? If there's light coming into your garage, odds are rodents could gain access. So it's another common area that you're going to want to check. Maybe set up monitoring devices on the left and right side of the door just to see if anything's coming in. A lot of times I'll go to homes and on the outside by the garage door where the weather stripping is, which is just like either the white strip that comes down, it's a little rubber strip, you'll see it's just been chewed right out. And that's because rodents are going right into your garage. And if rodents get into your garage, then they're going to make their way right into your house. So these are just common areas for people to know, to go through their own home, to look for, hey, am I having mice in my home? These are the areas where you're going to want to start to look. If a rodent problem goes on long enough, you will actually start to see the mice, and that will be a dead giveaway, then there's no doubt about it. Or you might find droppings in much more abundance. This would be more for a homeowner who isn't sure but just wants to do a check. Often I always advise doing at least 2 cleanings a year, and I mean full-blown, hey, I'm pulling out all the appliances, I'm pulling everything out of my cabinets and going through everything. This gives you an opportunity to really check through the house and make sure there's no droppings that have been there, that have been missed. And again, if you find something and you're not convinced it's necessarily new or active, clean it up and then monitor to see if they come back, all right? Because if they do, it's something you're gonna want to address right away. So if, I know all different homeowners do it in different ways. It's certainly something you can try and handle yourself. But if it's something that you're feeling uncomfortable with, just give Debug Pest Control a call and we'll swing out there and take a look for you.